Hello, everyone. I am very pleased to see you on screen. My name is Juan Pablo Guerrero. I am speaking to you from Washington, D.C. I am the director of the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, a network where specialists, civil society organizations, international financial institutions, government representatives, and experts get together and work to advance fiscal transparency and public participation. So I am very pleased to be facilitator for this very interesting session, the session number 5 on participation in fiscal issues. We're gonna have 3 wonderful papers to be presented on public participation and green budgeting, on the impact of public participation in the external control from the supreme audit institutions, and the impact of public participation in fiscal matters using technology. The experience of 3 countries on green budgeting, the Russian Federation, on the SAIs, Indonesia, and Croatia, our host country, on fiscal matters, e-technology, and public participation. The rules of our session are very clear. I'm gonna briefly present the authors and give them 15 minutes to present, after which we will take questions from the public and we will discuss some of the main findings of your work. So allow me to present first Tatiana Vinogradova from the St. Petersburg University of Management Technologies and Economics from the Russian Federation. Her paper is on public participation in green budgeting, ways to improve green budget decisions and transparency. And it addresses the role of non-government organizations, civil society organizations, and the general public in green budgeting. The paper analyzes a demand from citizens for adaptation and mitigation government policies and programs in the Russian Federation, including what sources of information citizens use for the expression of their opinions. So Tatiana, welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Juan Pablo and colleagues from different countries and institutions who gathered today at our panel. And of course, thank you to the Institute of Public Finance to invite me to speak. So I'm today going to discuss public participation in green budgeting, ways to improve green budget decisions and transparency on the example of Russian Federation. Addressing climate change and protecting the environment have become the key global challenges and priorities. Many countries increase their commitments to meet the Paris Agreement's goals. In the public finance area, they introduced a number of measures, climate tagging of budget lines, assessments of the costs of the social costs of carbon, cost-benefit analysis in environmental budget policy development, climate public expenditure, and institutional reviews, environment protection programs. With launching the Paris Collaborative on Green Budgeting by the OECD in 2017, the definition of green budgeting became unambiguous. The COVID pandemic has been a wake-up call for governments on the vulnerability of our economic, social, and environmental systems. And the Russian Federation is not an exception to speed up this recognition. On this September 2021, the first International Congress on Sustainable Development and Responsible Finance was held in Moscow with the support of the United Nations. The participants of the Congress, including the leading players from the United Nations, from the United States of America, from the European Union, in the framework of discussions on introducing green financing, emphasized that all states prioritize reducing the negative impact on the environment. In this context, my question is there a role for non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, and individual citizens in this agenda? And what are the ways to improve green budget decisions and transparency through public participation? Thus, the outline of my brief presentation is the following: analysis of the demands from the Russian citizens for government policies for adaptation and mitigation of climate change and overall environment protection. This includes sources of information citizens predominantly use from their opinion to form their opinions. Next, I will look into what budget is allocated on the environment protection in Russia. Then I present forms of public participation in the environmental policy making, which are most prevalent in Russia. And I finalize with some conclusions, some suggestions of how the public participation in green budgeting can improve preparation of adaptation and mitigation of government policies and programs and their transparency. The citizens' activity in the climate change field largely depends on how favorable the environmental situation is seen by them and what are their related concerns. According to the surveys by the All-Russian Center for the Study of Public Opinion, TSUOM, the absolute majority of Russian citizens believe that climate changes have been taking place on the planet in recent years. More than half of them note the impact of such changes in life. At the same time, 40% of Russians believe that the problem of global warming is far-fetched and overblown. The opposite opinion is shared by 52% of Russians. They believe that global warming is a really significant problem. The results of the poll on the slide shows that respondents associate the most acute environmental problems with pollution of reservoirs and their shores with garbage, industrial and sewage effluents, air pollution from automobile exhaust, unauthorized landfills, and the removal of household garbage. The majority of respondents are not ready to pay more for goods or services, even if the funds will be spent on the alternative energy sources or the energy efficiency. The absolute majority of respondents agreed to support the initiative to plant trees to reduce carbon dioxide emissions and would take part in such an action. 2/3 of respondents explain the introduction of an environmental tax by the European Union for Russian enterprises as a desire to get additional funding for the maintenance of the air infrastructure. Only 1 out of 5 Russians, 19%, sees greening of fiscal policies as intent to take care of the planet's ecology, and the younger generation is much more attentive to the environment. Thus, we see that generally the relevance of climate change and protecting the environment in the problematic agenda of Russians is growing, and the demand for the government to solve environmental problems is also growing. However, many people believe that environmental problems are less acute in their particular region, and the people are not ready to meet additional costs. There are not many environmental activists in place. The growth of public attention to the environment is situational and usually explosive. So, while there is no green budget tagging in place currently, we can examine public expenditure that make a positive contribution to green objectives through the budget line environmental protection. What numbers are we speaking of? Around 4 billion euros are allocated for environmental protection in the federal budget for 2021, which is 11.5% more than in 2020. Measures in the field of environmental protection are structured in state programs and the National Priority Project Ecology. The figure on the slide shows the growth of expenditure on environmental protection in current prices since 2003. However, according to the environmental protection expenditures as a percentage of GDP, it remains relatively stable. Another way to look at the Russian government priority budget expenditure is the national projects on priority public investments adopted in 2018 by the year 2024. The national project ecology is one of them and targets on solving burning environmental problems, including the introduction of the best available technology and the creation of a management system for industrial and solid waste. The table on the slide shows the expenditure on federal projects which are included in this national project ecology for 2021-2023. So how do Russians form their opinion on environmental issues? As we see, in addition to personal observations, the main sources of information about the state of the environment are social networks and regional and local television. Two main institutionalized forms of public participation in the Russian environmental policy are environmental councils, expert advisory of public, and the public chamber of the Russian Federation, which is also present in Russian regions. There are many environmental types of collegiate bodies within different governmental agencies at central and regional level. They consist of expert practitioners and experts which are nominated by the environmental NGOs. For example, the Public Council under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. The key objective of this council is to consider drafts of socially significant legal acts developed by the ministry. 34 members of this council are selected on a competitive basis. The council has the standard of work, the code of ethics, and its web page where they put some relevant information. Another example at central level is the Public Council under the Federal Service for Supervision of Natural Resources. It consists of 12 NGOs and 4 business associations. And the public chamber of the Russian Federation holds various roundtables and various discussions on environmental topics, what is then widely discussed in the press. Unfortunately, the environmental public councils and the public chamber do not currently focus on their discussions on budgetary and fiscal policies on the environment. Meanwhile, participatory budgeting practices have become most rapidly developing forms of public participation in the budget process in recent years in Russia. The first participatory budgeting experiment in Russia was launched in the Stavropol region in 2007, and already in 2020, 290 participatory budgeting mechanisms of various scales were implemented in 73 out of 85 regions of Russia. One key prerequisite was the political commitment from the finance minister towards increasing of budget transparency and public participation according with the international standards. Let me remind you that Russia has a transparency score of 74 out of 100 in the recent open budget survey, what makes it 14th in the rating out of 117 countries, it says. Since 2015, the Ministry of Finance of Russia became interested in the effects of participatory budgeting and created the Center for Participatory Budgeting at the Financial Research Institute of the Ministry of Finance. The center works as a research and a resource center for participatory budgeting. In 2020, amendments were made to the budget code and the federal law on local self-government to institutionalize the practice of participatory budgeting at local level. What will be then green participatory budget?
Tatiana,
it is allocated.
Tatiana, you have 3 minutes left.
Yeah, I have 3 slides. Can I manage?
Perfect. Yeah, of
Yes.
course. I'm just letting you know ahead of time.
Yes,
Please. Thank you.
I have 2 slides about green budgeting and 1 conclusion. So what will be then green participatory budgeting? It is allocating money specifically towards projects proposed and selected by citizens, focused on environment protection, projects reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and other relevant with green economy and projects. There is still no such a priority set by local and regional governments for selection of citizens' proposals within participatory budgeting initiatives. In turn, Russian citizens' priorities remain in the field of improvement of local social services, building roads, bridges, whatever, gas supply systems, this type of projects. However, analysis of the initiatives shows that people also want to care about the environment. There are increasing number of proposals arise in the field, including water waste treatment plants and waste disposal, soil conservation measures, elimination of illegal dumps, waste collection, etc. So as shown by examples presented in the article of the well-known researcher of participatory budgeting and emeritus professor of the University College London, Yves Caban, green participatory budgeting has a huge public awareness power, helps forming pro-environmental behavior, including climate-friendly actions. It involves the individual citizens, NGOs, and community groups into the budget decision-making to help achieve environmental goals. Participatory budgeting can offer effective strategies for climate change adaptation, and thus there is a great potential of the participatory budgeting tool. In conclusion, there are some suggestions of government-led arrangements coming out of this analysis to improve green budget decision and transparency drawing on public participation. Develop green budget literacy and environmental culture of citizens. Promote the development of environmental NGOs. Ensure meaningful participation of citizens and NGOs in the development of green budget policy initiatives. Involve citizens and NGOs in monitoring of green budget implementation. Ensure the openness and accessibility of information on the state of the environment, including public budget expenditure in this field. Build awareness and public support by communicating of importance of these issues. Start green budget tagging and design green participatory budgeting initiatives at national level, and facilitate green participatory budgeting at subnational level, replicate and scale up of the green participatory budgeting practices. I want to stop here by thanking everyone and see if you have any questions. I hope I managed in 15 minutes.
You did very well, and it's a great work, a very comprehensive review of the current state of green budgeting in your country and the role of the public. So thank you very much. We leave the questions for the last part of our session. I already have one, so don't worry. But let's first give the floor to Mohammad Wiyudi from the Institute of Local Government Studies of the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom. His work is on the impact of public input in audit processes, taking as a case study the one from Indonesia. The author observes and studies to what extent the different mechanisms of citizen engagement have an impact in external control in Indonesia. Thank you. Muhammad, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Joan. Can you see my slides?
We can.
All right, okay, I'm gonna start now. Thank you very much. Hello, I hope everyone is doing great today. My name is Muhammad Wahyudi, or UD. I'm a final year PhD doctoral researcher at the Institute of Local Government Studies at the University of Birmingham. And I'm originally from Indonesia. So my presentation today is actually part of my project about FAI and citizen engagement. Okay, some highlights of my discussion today. First, I will briefly explain the background of my research. Then I will talk about the research questions, research gap, problem, objective, and questions. And then I will briefly talk about my research designs and methods, and then the results as well as the conclusions. So what is the background of my research? So first of all, some of you might be unfamiliar with the Supreme Audit Institution. So this is the institution that conduct an external audit to public agencies and which are a critical part of the formal financial accountability mechanism in most countries. They have different names in different countries, but they basically doing the same job. And they have started to acknowledge the importance of citizens in helping them to fulfill their mandate. So in recent years, there has been a growing interest in the topic of SAIs and citizen engagement. So for instance, there were 2 UN symposium in 2011 and 13 specifically discuss about this topic. And then there's also a board bank working paper series and self-learning platform that try to encourage SII to engage with the citizen. And there's also increased support from major international organizations such as OECD, as well as the International Budget Partnership. And the recent COVID-19 pandemic also heightened this notion of SAI and citizen engagement. And SAI and so far utilize various mechanisms to engage with the citizens. So for instance, in the OECD publication in 2014, there were 2 types of, they're categorized into 2 groups, which is the transparency and then participatory mechanism. So transparency mechanism refer to practices developed by audit institution to disclose information, basically. And with the participatory mechanism, it refers to mechanism for cooperation and two-way exchange. And there are several rationale why there's a support for SAI and citizen engagement. I'm using the INTOSAI framework. So the INTOSAI framework is more like a norm or standard that the SAIs across the world adopted to become a well-functioning SAI. So they pose 3 arguments to support SAI and citizen engagement. First is strengthening public trust, and there's also to enhance the SAI transparency and accountability, as well as providing public value. And the idea of SAI and citizen engagement in the INTOSAI framework also evolved from just making the audit report publicly available to responding to citizens' demands. And some publication focus on the topic of SAI and citizen engagements also extend more argument why SAI need to engage with the citizens. For example, producing report which is easy to comprehend by the general audience, as well as identifying with higher audit risk. And like I said earlier, recent COVID-19 pandemic have also heightened the need for SAI to actively engage with the citizen. And however, what we know about this topic is quite limited, really. So for instance, it has not been covered in many academic literature. Most of the sources on this topic up to now has been coming from the gray literature, such as unpublished paper of international organization report and studies. And the current publication did not give us much information other than various mechanisms and how they group into each types. While in fact, some studies, for instance, from the open budget survey, they indicate that in terms of SAI and citizen engagement, they have various degree of implementation, even if it is under the same category. And the existing publication also suggested a strong role of administrators in participation. For example, they most likely determine when and how they engage, yet no publication that explore this further. So from the citizen participation literature, they also tend mainly focus on the front end process. I would call this a front end process, while there is a need for the back end process, which is kind of limited. So based on this consideration, what is not yet clear is that whether and how the public input was acted upon and by the auditors, as well as the impact of public input on SAI work. So I'm using a single case study of Indonesia SAI public comment mechanism with the research objective to explore whether and how public comment are acted upon and the impact. So I asked 2 questions. How did the officers use the authority to determine whether and how public comments are acted upon and the impact of public comments for the BPK audit? BPK is Indonesian ACI. So like I mentioned earlier, this is a single case study, and I use various data collections. I use a secondary data from public comment data sets, official documents and report, as well as semi-structured interview with 40 officers as Indonesian ACI. My analysis is statistic descriptive, document analysis, and thematic analysis. So this is the procedure of BPK PCM. So basically, two working unit involves in managing the public comments. There are public relation unit and the audit unit. So the national procedure stated the process of managing comments involve bureaucratic approval at the PR unit before it can be forwarded to the audit unit. And my study shows there's so the formal design actually giving the administrators the authority to fully manage and shape public participation. So the design itself influence who participate, what kind of information that public send, as well as the level of administrator authority. However, this will not be part of today's presentation. And what are the results of my study? For the first question, so given the discretion that the administrator have over how the public comment affect their work, this study identified three categories. Sorry, for the first one, how did the officer use the authority to determine whether and how public comments are upon? So my study found that the officer at BPK have relatively high degree of discretion to determine whether and how they act on the public comments. I'm using Lipsky concept of street level bureaucracy to identify what kind of coping or discretionary practices that they develop and what kind of factors that influence these practices. So I found that there are several significant factors that contribute to these practices. There's include condition of work, there's a limited resources, the ambiguity of goals, there's a non-voluntary client, and difficulties in measuring performance. These are mostly coming from Lipsky idea of condition of work in street level bureaucracy. However, I also found some practices that were influenced by personal beliefs toward the citizen meaningfulness, as well as the first line supervisor role and the professional ethos and traditions. So for examples, in terms of condition of work for the auditors, resources inadequacy is one of the main considerations used to verify the comments. However, since the take-up of comment is quite low actually, so resource constraints was not due to workers ratio versus client. The auditors considered the resources in terms of cost and time to follow up their comments. So the priority is the audit assigned by the organization. So for the second questions, what are the impact of public comments for the BPK audit process? So given the discretion that the administrator have over how the public comment affects their work, so my study identified three categories of impact. So the first one is the officers use their discretion to ensure the achievement of organization goals. For instance, the comments help the auditor assess the audit risk, select the audit sample, and develop audit procedures only if it meets the organization goals. And this type of impact suggests that comments are used instrumentally as a means to an end. However, my study also found that there was a minority argument among my participants regarding the impact of comments upon citizenship. For instance, they argued that the public comments could make the audit process more responsive to public demands in terms of responsiveness and make the organization more professional in performing their works in terms of accountability. However, this is a very minor. And I also found that the majority, this is quite significant actually, that the public input or comments has no impact on audit. So the officers use their discretion, such as by classifying the comment as cannot be processed further or delaying to follow up the comments, referring the comments to the government agency inspectorate instead doing it or acting on it by themselves, or taking no action for the comments has meant that some comments have not regarded in the audit, hence there's no impact. So what are the key points or highlights? My studies found that design matters because it determines the level of administrator authority in participation. So in my study, I found that the officers determine how they receive the public inputs, the way they verify the public inputs, the criteria they use to verify the inputs, and whether and how they respond to public input and decide if the comments or input is valuable for their work. And second, I found that the condition of work, beliefs over citizen meaningfulness, first-line supervision, and professionalism shape the frontline officer practices in public participation. However, only the beliefs towards citizen meaningfulness associated with officer practice towards citizen benefits. The other contributing factors mainly aim towards the administrative benefits. And regarding the impact, my findings shown that the inputs or the public inputs or comments are used instrumentally as a means to an end. So I found that a more apparent instrumental than democratic impact of public comments is likely to be related to the fact that the public one mechanism had to occur within the existing government culture that typically guided by instrumental views. So in instrumental views of the auditor is evident in the criteria they use for to follow up the comment, for instance. And I also found that, my conclusion also found that a more significant instrumental impact suggested that democratic intention of participation is often inconsistent with the administration objective that many focus on achieving agency goal. And the last one is, yeah, like I said, the administrator view themselves as an expert and citizen as a client. So they consider, I mean, the supreme board institutions still consider the organization or the officers still consider themselves as an expert, and citizens can only give input when they ask to, and they have a very limited skills and knowledge to provide input to the organization. I think, yes, this is all my presentation, and I would very much welcome any feedback or question from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muhammad, for an excellent, very well documented. Let me go back to Tatiana. The question that I have is, you do explore the unwillingness of the people to pay more for public services. So there is the tax challenge for citizen engagement regarding green budgeting. Now, you explained that there is great interest in green budgeting, but the question is there any possible connection on the more specific projects, such as water, cleaning water disposal, and citizens' contribution? In other words, I remember from the Russian Federation experience that participatory budgeting was, as you mentioned, well connected to citizens' contribution to the specific infrastructure projects. Do you see such experience to be transferred to the green budgeting agenda in your country? That's a first question. So the link between citizen engagement, more contributions, and the specific policy. The second question regards the benefits. You make a very good list of recommendations. Do you explore in your work the specific benefits of citizen engagement and how your recommendations are linked to these benefits? Those are the questions that I have. And let me now raise questions to Mohammad. One of your findings is that as a response to public participation, there is significant discretion on public servants. The question is, should it be otherwise? In other words, is there a frame in which particular suggestions or consultation outputs should give to specific responses? And the second question to you, Mohammad, is do you have specific recommendations moving forward? If public officials were to listen to you, what would be your recommendations? So,
okay, can you repeat the first question, Juan, if you don't mind?
the first question is you find that there is a lot of discretion on the response. So the question is, should that discretion be reduced? Should it be a set of regulations so everyone has more certainty about the response? And to what extent, the question is how limited that discretion should be. So let's go to you, Tatiana, on the benefits related to your recommendations.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the very interesting, very good questions. I hope I understood them well, and I try to give my opinion to this. So what about links? People do propose projects at the local level within the participatory budgeting. As I mentioned, they raise many environmental questions like elimination of dumps, like waste collection, separate waste collection, like this garbage removal, disposal. We really have a lot of floods right now and many fires everywhere all over the Russia. So people do see these problems, and they really rise these projects more often. For me, the issue is that government do not prioritize these topics in participatory budgeting programs currently at the moment. But I believe this is just the question of time. For the second question, which for me is very connected to the first one, about how people do see benefits of this green budgeting. There are two gaps in public participation in environmental policies in Russia. There are many gaps, but one I want to emphasize. One gap is representativeness. There are a lot of public councils, a lot of public hearings and other initiatives. At the same time, with the conditions of civil society currently, it is the issue of research, how all population is represented through these public councils and how all population can voice and can talk with government. So for me, this is a real gap. And another gap for me is understandability. So this green budget policy is not understandable by the citizens. It's too difficult to understand them, the links between the fires in the forests and floods and green budget issues. For me, the benefits to populations will be easily to catch when these budget policies will be explained in a very simple way, and populations will see that these additional payments for them are connected with adaptation and mitigation to climate change.
Thank you. Let us first listen to the third paper presented this morning that, of course, brings up a very provocative question: does fiscal openness pay off? And then they study the social, economic, and political effects of transparency and accountability in the formulation process of fiscal policy, and they investigate the level and the type of public interest in the area. The authors of the paper from the University of Zagreb are Ana Maria Musa, Teresa Rogic-Lugaric, and Petra Durman. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well and see my presentation?
We can, and this is Petra, right? One of the
Yes, yes. Hello, everyone. This is Petra. Yes, and I will present today our research.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. The topic of our research is related to the issues of fiscal transparency and openness, and we actually focused on this dimension of fiscal openness, which refers to the process of involving public into the process of formulating public policy, and especially on one instrument, e-consultations. Okay. Okay. Oh, it's working. Sorry. With regards to the content, I will very briefly introduce the research topic and main research question. Then we will give a short overview of the state of fiscal transparency and openness with focus on the state in Croatia. And then we will come to the central part of our research, which is preoccupied with online public consultations in fiscal matters in Croatia. First, let me explain a little bit the relevance of the concept of public participation in contemporary governance. Today, those two principles, transparency and openness, are seen as prerequisites for democratic and legitimate public governance. There are basically two reasons why those principles are, their implementation is so important. One reason, which could be explained as the democratic one, is that for decades, political administrative institutions are facing a sort of legitimacy crisis, and citizens' trust has continuously been transparency, and some new innovative instruments for participants, for involving citizens, can be seen as a sort of remedy to this negative trend. Besides being an issue of democracy and legitimacy of the political administrative institutions and their functioning within this context of legitimacy crisis and decreasing citizens' trust in institutions, the public can also be a very valuable resource of useful suggestions and comments, and in that respect can provide some innovative solutions for public problems. In our research, we focused on one such innovative participatory instrument, online public consultations in Croatia, but we focused only on the area of fiscal policy. So the main research question referred to the level and type of public interest in the area of fiscal policy and the level of influence of the interested public in the formulation process of the fiscal policy. Next slide, please. Now, let me just very briefly explain the concepts of transparency and openness, because they are often referred at as synonyms, but they are actually different, although they are interconnected. So transparency refers to the accessibility of information on different aspects of internal organization and functioning of government bodies to the public. So basically, it is a one-way process which is implemented through the right to know instruments, both proactive publishment of information or passively when a person gives a request on information. And then fiscal transparency is related to the provision of financial information to the public. And openness is broader aspect because not only public has the information of the government, but also provides feedback information. So it is basically through two-way process, which is implemented through the instruments such as public consultations, today in online format, such as participatory budgeting and so on. So fiscal openness refers to the level of okay, so this is sorry, to the level of public influence in the formulation of this policy. Okay, fiscal policy also have some specificities. I will skip this for now because I know we are late. Yes, next slide. In Croatia, there has been, so we have a regulatory framework for achieving transparency and openness in place. Most important are the law on the right to access information, which is a systemic regulation which mandates the publication of different financial documents on behalf of public authorities, and also the budget law. There are also some recommendations, action plans, and so on. But what is important that, let's say, in the last 10 days, an important improvement has been achieved not only at the level of national government, but also at the local and regional level. With respect to the openness, e-consultations are basically the main instrument, which is, by the way, legally obligatory. So all public authorities have to conduct e-consultations when they are issuing regulations which affect public interest. There are also some other instruments. Perhaps the most important is participatory budgeting, which is not legally obligated. It is a facultative instrument. It is employed at the local level, but only a few cities are conducting those instruments as a real participatory budgeting with all its definitionary elements. Yes, we can go on. Thank you. Okay, now with respect to our methodology, we basically mostly relied on the data I collected within my doctoral research 2.5 years ago, and we supplemented those data with information for 2 additional years, 2019 and 2020. But then we focused on the e-consultations that were conducted by the Ministry of Finance. Some of the data that were collected included the issue how long the e-consultations lasted. So because it is obligatory to conduct them to be open for them for 30 days. Then whether the goals of the consultations were explained. So this refers to the issue of clarity. Then the type of regulation was analyzed, number and type of participants, number and type of comments, the acceptance rates of the comments, and the correlation between these different factors, type of participants, type of comments, and the acceptance rate. Okay, so we can go on. Here we can see the findings. So the first table actually shows the data for the Ministry of Finance compared to the average for the state level administrative organizations and other traditional governmental departments. And we can see that basically with respect to these procedural aspects, which refer to the duration of e-consultations and its clarity, the Ministry of Finance shares some deficiencies with all other administrative organizations. However, the respective ministry conducts more e-consultations, but this can be explained by the nature of the ministry, because it is continuously a very regulatory active ministry. So it issues a lot of regulations, and therefore there is also a higher number of the participants and comments. But if we consider the number of participants and comments in relation to each per e-consultation, then we can see that actually the number of participants is not that higher compared to average for other administrative organizations. What is higher is the rate of acceptance, so the acceptance rate of comments. which is higher in the case not only in Ministry of Finance, but also in the case of traditional governmental departments in relation to average of other administrative organizations. But this can be actually explained by the characteristics of the participants who participate in the e-consultations. Second table shows the data in 5-year period, so with supplemented data for 2 additional years. And here basically the situation is not much different. Of course, more e-consultations have been conducted with more participants and more e-comments, but the acceptance rate for the comments has somewhat fallen. Yes, next slide. And here we can see the characteristics of the interested public in the consultations which were conducted by the Ministry of Finance. So if we consider the composition or the structure of the interested public, we can see that the majority of participants are actual individuals, and this is so in all e-consultations conducted by other administrative organizations. So individuals participate most oftenly. However, there is a much higher share of the comments submitted by chambers, private sector organizations, and also NGOs than in e-consultations conducted by other administrative organizations. And this then reflects on the type of comments which are submitted, because in the case of Ministry of Finance, we can see a high share of very informed, argumented comments, so more than 40%. But this is in relation to the type of participants who are involved, because organized interest and especially those that are involved in implementation, those that possess some sort of expert knowledge, of course, submit more informed comments. And then this reflects also on the acceptance rate. We can see that accepted fully or partially is almost 35% of comments. And this is due to the higher share of argumented informed comments, which tend to be most accepted by administrative organizations. Okay, and I will conclude. In the area of fiscal policy, we can say that e-consultations basically suffer from similar procedural deficiencies as other administrative organizations. So those are related to the duration of the consultations, clarity, and so on. However, differently than we supposed at the beginning of our paper, public interest is not considerably higher in area of fiscal policy than in other policy areas, although it is an issue which is, let's say, always hot. It is always important for public to know how their money is being spent. But what we found out is that the level of administrative responsiveness towards public is higher than the average for other administrative organizations. But as I already said, this is due to the characteristics of the interested public that is involved in the process, and due to the type of comments these participants submit, which are more argumented and more expert. Okay, and I will finish now because the time has run out. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the comments, and sorry once again.
No problem. Thank you very much for keeping in time. Let me now, there are some questions for you, Petra. I will read them in a minute, but first let's go back to Muhammad on recommendations and the level of discretion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Juan, for the questions. Yes, there are two definitions of discretion in the literature of public administration. The first one is primarily concerned about the deviation from the rules or formal policy, and the second one is more concerned on the freedom to act given the circumstances or the conditions. And my kind of discretion is actually more on the later, on the second part, which is the freedom that the officers have to decide what they need to do given the circumstances. In this case, given what sort of comments that they receive, and like what kind of resources that they currently have. And for me, I think it's discretion is still necessary for the auditors, because this is something that you cannot make it uniform. Like you cannot be sure whether you get a good public inputs, or whether you receive a very like lack of everything on the input that the public send. So I think the discretion is still necessary. However, what's more important is how to ensure that the officer how the officers use their discretionary practice. And I would probably recommend that the officers were equipped with the necessary skills and knowledge that they need to implement this policy. So first, that's probably the recommendation related to your second questions. And however, I also found that because
thank you,
because there's this discretion, then what I found is there's this huge gap between what the officer expect and what the public can actually have. So long that the criteria, the expectation that the officers have is still quite high, then the public cannot catch up, and there will never be any public input that will be acted upon by the officer. So the second recommendation probably related to the lowering criteria that the organization have currently. So for instance, right now, the Indonesian SAI required that the citizen who wish to submit the inputs need to attach like a ID or contacts information. And some of them are unwilling to attach or like send contact information because of the confidentiality of the information, because sometimes they report about corruption act of public agency. So this is probably that the organization need to consider to like lowering or revising the criteria that they currently have. And there's also there's also a recommendation related to enhance citizen skill and knowledge. So it's to meet the expectation of the officer, and it could be done by collaborating with the non-government, non-state actor, because actually based on the data set that I have, some of the participants were coming from a non-state actors such as CSO and our NGO, and they have quite good quality of comment in terms of meeting the expectation of officers. So I would say that there is collaboration with individual citizens as well as the NGO to help the citizen to meet the expectations. Yes.
Thank you, Muhammad. That's at least 4 recommendations. We were expecting the main recommendation, but we appreciate very much how you expand on this, giving your findings. To Petra, now, if you please, there is a question, and we have 2 minutes to address the questions. There is a question on if you have more information about how the different comments from the public are treated within the ministry, how they are processed, and the impact that this has in the ministry. And that's one question that we have on the chat for you, Petra, from Marianne Fabian. Thank you very much. And I would ask you to finish our session with one very simple response to your question. Is it worth it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I would like to explain a little bit how we did the analysis. This was basically the quantitative content analysis. So I basically analyzed the reports on conducted e-consultations, which contain the information on submitter, so participant, then the comment itself, Then we have the status of the comment, whether it is accepted, not accepted, noted, and then we have the explanation of the authority why it is accepted or not. So by analyzing those comments, well, there was a huge amount of them, but what I can say is that there is a lot of comments that are rather technical, but also a lot of comments that are argumented in a sense that, for example, private sector organizations often provide some examples why something will not work in practice, because they are important as implementers in this policy area. And then, for example, the chambers often provide some good arguments or solutions why something would be better. So those comments are most often accepted, but often there are also some only technical remarks, and these technical remarks are also very often accepted. When you have some comments which are only attitudes or opinions, not backed up by the arguments, those comments are at least accepted. Basically in all policy areas, not only in fiscal policy, but also in fiscal matters. Yes, however, I have to say what is the effect. I have to say that this analysis encompassed only the procedure of e-consultations, which means that for laws which have to still pass the parliamentary procedure, we basically don't know what happens after. So we know that during this procedure of drafting regulation, they were accepted, but whether they passed also the parliamentary procedure, this part was not analyzed because it would be then too extensive, but this is basically the next step for further research.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. You owe me a very quick response to, is it worth it, Petra?
Sorry, yes, thank you for a reminder. Yes, whether is it worth the effort? Yes, definitely, and especially for those participants that are interested to be involved, who are affected by a certain policy or by a certain regulation, who possess certain knowledge, no matter on which aspect of the implementation or the policy. But the more expert the comment, backed up by arguments, the higher probability it will be accepted. So for those actors, yes, definitely it is worth it. Thank you.
Well, congratulations to all of you, Tatiana, Mohammad, and Petra, and team from the Zagreb University for your work. This is so useful for us at the GIFT network, who work with the civil society and public servants of the Ministry of Finance. This makes very strong cases and gives detail about the challenges and the benefits of citizen engagement. So congratulations to the Institute of Public Finance for this wonderful conference, for this session in particular, and thank you for allowing me to be part of the conversation. Mihaela, thank you. Gracias.
Thank you.
To you.
Thank you, everyone.
We take the coffee break, and we come back in 10 minutes, 8 minutes for Dr. Alt's keynote presentation. See you soon.